New fish. Royce Harlan's voice cut across the yard. Smile for me. The slap cracked through the open air, loud, flat, final. Dozens of men went silent. Welcome to my house, boy. Dorian Vance's head turned with the blow, then slowly came back to center. He said nothing. Nothing, no words, I like the quiet ones. Harlan leaned closer. Quiet ones break pretty. Guard watched from the rail, keys swinging at his side. He looked away slowly, like he'd seen the same thing too many times to care. Dorian stood still, his cheek burning, his pulse even. Beneath the sleeve of his gray uniform, his right hand curled into a fist, slow and certain, the way it used to before a bell. Those knuckles remembered. Each one had been wrapped in tape more times than he could count. Each one had ended fights faster than most men could blink. Dorian breathed out. Then he opened his hand. Not yet. Have you ever watched a man get hit just for walking into a room? Ironwood State Correctional sat far beyond the last gas station, behind 3 fences and a river of razor wire. The walls held more than 1,000 men. The yard smelled like iron, bleach, and old rain. Sound carried strangely in there. A cough could echo, a whisper could travel. And everyone learned quickly that silence was its own kind of currency. Dorian Vance had only been inside a short while. Before Ironwood, his name had meant something. He was the state lightweight champion. 18 wins, no losses, 14 knockouts. Promoters had flown in from both coasts to see him. One of them had slid a contract across a diner table. 6 figures with a private jet waiting on the other side of the signature. Dorian read it twice. Then he folded it in half and pushed it back. My mother's sick, he said. I'm not leaving. She had stage 3 cancer. Her treatments cost more than Dorian made, so he took night shifts at a warehouse off Route 9. I trained at dawn, worked until dark, and sat beside her bed whenever he could. I kept telling himself the title could wait. Titles always wait. Mothers don't. Then came the robbery he didn't commit. A gas station. A few blocks from his gym, was held up late at night. The clerk described a tall black man with a fighter's build. Dorian was tall. Dorian was black. Dorian had a fighter's build. The security footage was grainy. The lineup was rushed. His public defender was carrying dozens of other cases. The jury did not take long. The judge gave him 6 years. Dorian never raised his voice. Not when the verdict came down. Not when he saw his mother's face in the gallery. He just looked at his hands. The same hands that had ended fights in seconds. And he made himself a promise. Inside these walls, those hands would stay down. One swing, even a fair one, could add years to his sentence. He would not give them that. He would serve his time, keep his record clean, and go home to his mother. That was the plan. Royce Harlan was the problem. Harlan ran C-block like a small kingdom. He stood 6'4" and weighed around 240 pounds, with a neck like a fire hydrant and a laugh that made new arrivals flinch. I had already spent years behind bars for putting a man into a coma over a card game. He liked new arrivals. He called them tribute. I took their commissary, their phone minutes, their dignity. And when they had nothing left to give, he took their fear and kept it like a pet. What made Harlan untouchable wasn't his size. It was Officer Calvin Mercer. Mercer worked the C-block floor. He carried his keys low and his eyes even lower. Whenever Harlan collected, Mercer somehow found a reason to be at the far end of the hall. Whenever a camera might catch something, Mercer seemed to remember that it needed cleaning. They never spoke openly about an arrangement. They didn't have to. A nodie here, a blind eye there. Harlan kept the block quiet, and Mercer wrote reports saying everything was fine. So when Harlan slapped the new man in the yard, he expected the usual response. A flinch, a stammer, a tribute paid. I had no idea what he had just touched. I didn't know that the quiet man's hands had once been worth more than Mercer would earn in years. I didn't know about the 18 wins, the 14 knockouts, or the reflexes drilled so deeply into Dorian's body that they could fire before thought. Harlan saw a slim black man with lowered eyes and read weakness. The whole block read weakness. They were all looking at the wrong thing. They watched Dorian's lowered head and missed the stillness beneath it. The kind of calm that isn't surrender. It's a fighter pacing himself. It's a man counting rounds. Dorian lay on his bunk and listened to Harlan's laugh roll down the tier. I thought about his mother's voice on the phone, growing thinner with every call. I thought about his promise. Keep the hands down. Go home. I didn't know that keeping that promise was about to cost him almost everything. The chow hall ran on rules nobody ever wrote down. Where you sat, who you looked at, how long you held someone's stare. Dorian learned the rules by watching. I took a corner seat with his back to the wall and his tray in front of him. Gray meatloaf, 2 slices of bread, a carton of milk he was saving for the calcium. He almost made it through the meal. Then Harlan crossed the room slowly, with 2 men trailing behind him like shadows. The hall noticed before Dorian did. Forks stopped moving. Conversations disappeared. By the time Harlan's shadow fell over the tray, Dorian already knew. "You're in my seat," Harlan said. There were empty seats all over the room. Dorian started to stand. I didn't argue. He simply reached for his tray so he could move. Harlan got there first. One thick hand flipped it. The tray spun, and the meatloaf, bread, and milk hit Dorian square in the chest before sliding to the floor. The carton burst. White milk ran down his gray shirt like something had split open. The hall laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Enough for the laughter to become its own wall, and Dorian stood inside it, dripping and alone. "Clean it up," Harlan said. "You made a mess." Dorian looked at him. Just looked. And for half a second, something flashed behind his eyes, fast as a counterpunch. Then it was gone. He knelt. I gathered the bread. He wiped the milk from the floor with a napkin that came apart in his hand. I did it without a word, the way a man does something he has already decided to survive. Harlan watched with a grin. Good boy. The injustice of it hung in the room like smoke. Hundreds of men were there, and not one stood up. Not one said a word, because every one of them had done the same calculation. And the answer always came back the same. Crossing Harlan cost too much. Dorian carried the ruined tray to the bin. His hands did not shake, and by the door, leaning against the frame with his arms folded, Officer Calvin Mercer had watched everything. When Harlan glanced his way, Mercer did the smallest thing imaginable. He nodded. The slap had been a test. The tray had been a message. What came next was a campaign. Harlan understood power, the way some men understand weather. You don't take everything at once. You take it slowly, piece by piece, until the other man forgets he ever owned anything. So Harlan started small, and he made it last. Dorian returned to his cell and found his mattress on the floor, his sheets gone, and his family photographs pushed under the bars with a boot print stamped across them. His mother's face stared up at him through a gray smear of dirt. Dorian picked up the photograph. He wiped it clean with his thumb. He said nothing. Then his commissary disappeared. The soap, the stamps, the instant coffee he had bought with money he barely had. He found the empty wrappers arranged neatly across his pillow like a signature. After that, they came for the letters. Dorian wrote to his mother every day. He waited for her replies the way a drowning man waits for air. Harlan learned that because Harlan learned everything, and he made sure the letters stopped reaching Dorian. They piled up somewhere they never should have been, while Dorian sat through mail call with an open expression that slowly closed. Here is what Harlan believed he was seeing. A man breaking exactly the way men always broke. I had done this before. There was a rhythm to it, almost a kind of music, and he thought Dorian was moving to it, like everyone else. The lowered eyes, the flat voice, the way he seemed to flinch at nothing. To Harlan, silence had only ever meant one thing: fear. And fear was the sweetest thing the block had to offer. I would lie on his bunk, replaying the sound of the tray hitting Dorian's chest, remembering the milk running down the gray shirt, and smile at the ceiling. This one would break beautifully. They always did. But Harlan was reading the wrong man, because what looked like fear was something else entirely. It was discipline. It was 18 fights worth of a cornerman's voice living inside Dorian's head. Stay calm. Don't load up. Wait for the round. Dorian wasn't shrinking. I was holding a line. And that line was a promise to a woman in a hospital bed. Every time Harlan pushed, the line bent. It did not break. Eventually, others joined in. Because cruelty gets easier when a crowd makes room for it. Harlan had a crew. A handful of men who fed off his scraps and feared his moods. They took turns. One slammed into Dorian in the shower line, daring him to turn around. Another spat in his food. Another stood outside his cell after lights out and quietly described what happened to men who thought they were better than the place they were in. Dorian took it. I took it the way stone takes rain, and Mercer watched it happen. There was a camera, mounted high in a steel cage at the end of the C-block tier. It was supposed to see everything. Mercer knew better. I knew the maintenance schedule better than the warden did. I knew when the camera was logged as down. I knew the angle of the blind spot near the showers, the one place the lens couldn't reach. And whenever Harlan went to work, Mercer somehow found paperwork at the far desk, with his back turned to the tier and his radio set low. A younger guard once asked him about it. You see what's happening to the new guy in C? Mercer didn't look up. I see a quiet block, he said. A quiet block is a good block. Don't go making it loud. The younger guard went quiet too. That was how it spread. Then came a phone call. Dorian got a few minutes on the tier phone. His aunt's voice came through small and tight, and he knew before she said it that his mother had gotten worse. The treatment wasn't holding. The doctors had started using words like comfort and time, words that meant the end was moving closer while Dorian stood behind 3 fences, unable to reach her. She asks about you, his aunt said. Every day. She wants to know you're okay. Dorian closed his eyes. Down the tier, Harlan's laugh rolled toward him like a wave. Tell her I'm okay, Dorian said. His voice didn't shake. Tell her I'm coming home. He hung up. Then he stood with his forehead against the cold cinder block and breathed the way his trainer had taught him between rounds, steady in, steady out when his body wanted to quit. One swing. That was all it would take to feel better for 1 second and lose everything that mattered. More years. More fences. His mother dying without him while he sat in a hole for teaching Royce Harlan a lesson no one would believe he had the right to teach. So Dorian kept his hands down. Harlan found him standing against the wall and mistook the posture for defeat. In Harlan's mind, this was the break. He stepped close and put his mouth near Dorian's ear. You're learning, he murmured. Keep this up and you'll be carrying my tray, maybe shining my shoes. Then he patted Dorian's cheek twice. Soft. The worst kind of soft. Quiet boys make good pets. In his head, Harlan was already counting the victory. He pictured Dorian hollowed out, useful, broken in, like a pair of boots. It never occurred to him that a man can be quiet because he is kind, that a man can be still because he is strong, that the difference between fear and control can be invisible right up until the moment it isn't. Dorian did not move. He let Harlan walk away laughing. Later, lying on a mattress on the floor, Dorian did something he had not done since the day his sentence was read. He flexed his right hand in the dark, slowly, finger by finger, feeling the old machinery wake up. Just checking, just in case. Nearby, the camera's red light blinked at an empty wall. The library was the one truly quiet place in Ironwood. Harlan didn't read. Dorian went there for the silence. He found an older man already sitting at a table, gray beard, half glasses low on his nose, a chess book open in front of him. The man watched Dorian sit down. He watched the way Dorian placed both hands flat on the table. Then he smiled. I know those hands, he said. Dorian looked up. Silas Tate, the man said. I trained fighters for decades before I ended up here. He tapped the table. I saw you take the state title. You dropped Keller with a check hook nobody saw coming. Silas chuckled. I saw it. I've also been watching you walk this block like a man holding his breath. I'm not here to fight, Dorian said quietly. I know that too. Silas leaned in. That's why they think you're weak. Out there, that restraint made you a champion. In here, it's getting you hurt slowly. He paused. What's your plan? Dorian stayed silent for a moment. Keep my head down. Do my time. Get home to my mother. And if they don't let you? Dorian's jaw tightened. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Silas nodded slowly, the way a cornerman nods when the bell is close. Then don't start it, he said. But son, if they leave you no choice, finish it. Outside, the count whistle blew. The ambush came after the pressure had been building for days. Dorian should have seen it in the little things. Harlan's crew went quiet at dinner. Harlan didn't take Dorian's food. He simply watched him from across the hall with the patient expression of a man who had already set a trap and only needed his target to step into it. When the block settled toward lockdown, Officer Calvin Mercer took his slow walk to the far desk. I sat down, and he turned his back to C block. The shower room was the blind spot. Everyone knew it. The camera, at the end of the tier, could not see inside the tiled corner. No lens, no witness, just water, concrete, and whatever a man could do in the dark. Dorian went in to wash before lockdown. He heard the door swing shut behind him. Then he heard the bolt slide. He turned. 4 men stood there, Harlan in front, 2 members of his crew at his sides, a 4th man by the door. The 4th man held something low in one hand. Dorian's eyes went to it on instinct, the way a fighter identifies a threat before his mind has to name it. A phone. Recording. They wanted it filmed. A trophy. A lesson for the whole block. No more pets, Harlan said. He cracked his knuckles. Time you learned what happens to quiet boys who don't break. You don't want to do this, Dorian said. His voice stayed even. Open the door. Walk out. Nobody has to get hurt. Harlan laughed. The others laughed with him. It was the last easy breath any of them would take. The first man came from Dorian's right, swinging wild. A huge haymaker telegraphed from a mile away. To everyone who would later watch the video, it looked like the man simply fell. To Dorian, time slowed the way it always had, the way it had since he first stepped through the ropes as a teenager. The punch came in as a wide, lazy arc. Dorian slipped it by an inch. I didn't even step backward. He moved his head just enough to let the fist pass his ear. Then he answered, with one short left hook to the body. The man folded around it like a coat falling from a hook and dropped to the wet floor, gasping. Done. The second man lunged before the first had fully hit the floor. He grabbed for Dorian's collar. Dorian caught the wrist, turned his hips, and used the man's own weight to spin him toward the tile. A short right uppercut met him on the way in. There was a sharp, clean crack. The second man sat down hard against the wall and stayed there, eyes swimming. Then Harlan roared and charged, all 240 pounds of him, arms wide, trying to crush whatever stood in front of him. This was the move he had trusted for years. The bull rush that had ended more than one man's resistance. Dorian did not meet it. He pivoted, light on his feet. He let the bigger man stumble past into empty air. Harlan turned, off balance. Dorian stepped in and threw the punch Silas had named in the library. The check hook. Short. Tight. Perfect. It landed clean on Harlan's jaw, with Dorian's full body turning behind it. Harlan's knees disappeared. The big man went down like a building, slow at the top and fast at the bottom. He hit the floor so hard that water jumped around him. The 4th man, the one holding the phone, stopped recording a trophy and started recording his own retreat. He backed into the corner, one hand shaking. The camera still pointed toward Dorian, because he had forgotten how to lower it. I'm out, he stammered. I'm out, man. I'm out. Dorian looked at him. I was breathing hard, but his hands were already lowering. I had not chased anyone. I had not thrown a single punch that wasn't answering one. Every blow had been the smallest thing required to stop the next attack. Nothing more. Then go, Dorian said. In mere seconds, the attack was over. Men were down. Dorian was still standing, untouched, his chest rising and falling, water running from his fists. And here is the part. People would replay again and again. Dorian did not gloat. I did not stand over Harlan. I did not say a word of victory. Instead, he walked over to the second man, the one sitting against the wall with unfocused eyes. Dorian knelt beside him. He checked that the man was breathing. Then he stood, shut off the still-running shower, and walked to the bolted door. With steady hands, he worked it open and stepped back into the tier. Behind him, the men who had cornered him were groaning in the dark. Dorian thought it was over. It was only beginning, because the phone had captured everything. Every slip, every counter, the check hook that dropped the giant, and then the part that made the footage impossible to ignore. The winner, kneeling beside the man who had come to hurt him, making sure he could still breathe. The video left Ironwood soon after, smuggled out the way. Almost everything leaves a prison, hand to hand, until it reached a place where no one could put it back. The internet did what the internet does. It exploded. People gave the clip a name and passed it from phone to phone, from break rooms to living rooms across the country. Commentators broke it down frame by frame. A retired trainer pointed at the screen and said, "That's not a brawler. That's a schooled fighter. Look at the footwork." Strangers argued through endless comment threads. Who was he? Why was a man who moved like that locked in a place like Ironwood? And why, when he clearly had the ability to do far more damage, did he stop the instant the danger ended? That question spread even faster than the fight itself. People who had never heard the name Dorian Vance were typing it now, sharing it, searching for him, asking each other who he really was. A reporter in another state saved the clip and started making calls. Inside Ironwood, none of that mattered yet. Inside, there was only the sound that came next. Dorian had barely returned to his bunk when the block erupted. Boots in the corridor. A lot of them. The metal shriek of the alarm winding up. Red lights strobing across the ceiling. Then, a hard voice over the speaker. Lockdown. Lockdown. All units. Cell doors began slamming shut down the tier, one after another. Dorian sat up. Through the bars, he saw Mercer moving quickly now, no longer sitting comfortably at his far desk. His face looked pale and furious. A radio was pressed to his mouth, and Dorian understood. In the cold way a fighter understands a punch that has already been thrown, that the men on the shower floor were going to tell their version first. The story they told was simple. Lies often are. By the time the paperwork settled, the official version had hardened into fact. Inmate Dorian Vance had attacked 4 men in the C-block showers without provocation. How was dangerous? How was trained? He had concealed a violent history and then exploded without warning. Several inmates were taken to the infirmary. One had a fractured jaw. The prison, they said, had a duty to act. It didn't matter that the facts made no sense. 1 man, 4 attackers. A bolted door, a blind spot chosen on purpose. Nobody in the warden's office asked why 4 men would corner 1 man in the only room without a camera. They had their paperwork, and the paperwork came from Officer Calvin Mercer. Mercer wrote that he heard a disturbance, responded, and found Vance standing over the victims. Victims! That was the word they used. Harlan played the part from a hospital bed, wired jaw and all. When the internal review came to take his statement, he could barely speak. That made him look even more like prey. He wrote his account on a notepad with a shaking hand. He came at us. We tried to stop him. He's an animal. I underlined the last word twice. Warden Vernon Keene read the report and made his decision quickly. Keene was a man who hated 2 things above everything else: paperwork and attention. The viral video had brought him a flood of both. The quickest way to make it stop, he believed, was to bury the man standing at the center of it. He signed the order. Dorian was pulled from his cell and taken to the special housing unit. Solitary confinement. A concrete box about the size of a parking space, with a steel door, a slot for food, and a window barely wider than a hand. He spent nearly all his time inside, with only brief access to a cage that passed for a yard when they allowed it. They told him it was for his own protection. They told him it was pending investigation. They did not tell him how long it would last. Dorian sat on the bunk and held his silence in both hands. I thought about his mother, somewhere beyond the fences, asking after a son who had suddenly vanished from every phone list and every visiting list. I thought about the promise he had kept until a locked shower room left him no choice. He could not even tell himself that defending his life had been wrong. I had done what he had to do. But inside Ironwood, truth rarely seemed to matter. Truth had a fractured jaw and a notepad, and truth was winning. Outside the walls, the same fight was tearing public opinion in two. The video had made Dorian famous, but fame is a coin with two faces. For every person who called him a hero, someone else called him exactly what Harlan had written. They didn't know him. They saw a few violent seconds and a prison uniform and decided the uniform was the whole story. I was an inmate. I had put several men in the infirmary. Someone dug up the robbery conviction and posted it without context. No mention of the grainy footage. No mention of the rushed lineup. Just a headline saying the viral hero was a convicted armed robber. The conversation changed almost overnight. People who had cheered now wrote that they had been fooled. The prison said nothing to correct any of it. Silence served them. If the public believed Dorian was a monster, no one would ask difficult questions about a carefully chosen blind spot in the showers. It might have ended there. A man erased inside a concrete box while the world moved on to the next clip. Except the video reached one more person. Miriam Caldwell had spent decades suing prisons. She ran a small legal aid office with terrible coffee and a wall buried under case files. And she had a particular allergy to official stories that arrived too clean. Miriam watched the video the way she watched everything. More than once. Slowly. Then again without sound. And what she saw was not what the headlines saw. She saw a man who never advanced. She saw counters, not attacks. She saw multiple aggressors and one defender. And she saw the defender stop the instant he could, then kneel to make sure a fallen man was still breathing. In Miriam Caldwell's long experience, you did not get footage like that from an ambush. You got it from a man trying very hard not to seriously hurt anyone. She drove to Ironwood and demanded to see him. They put her in a visiting booth behind scratched glass. When they brought Dorian in, he looked thinner than he had in the video, his eyes hollowed by isolation. Miriam introduced herself in one sentence. "My name is Miriam Caldwell. I think they're trying to bury the truth, and I'd like to prove it." Dorian studied her through the glass. "I had learned not to hope. They have 4 witnesses," he said, "and a guard's report, and my record. I have a phone video that already made me the villain." "You have a phone video," Miriam said, "that I can read better than they can." She opened her folder. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So he did. The mattress on the floor. The boot print across his mother's photograph. The letters that never came. The harassment. The bolted shower door. Then Dorian told her the detail that made Miriam stop writing and look up. "He recorded it himself," she said slowly. "Harlan wanted it filmed," Dorian said, "to humiliate me, to document what he thought would be an execution," Miriam said. "And instead he documented the opposite." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "But it's still his word against yours when it comes to how it started. People hear convicted inmate attacks, 4 men, and they fill in the blanks the easy way." She frowned. "I need more than the phone. I need the room. I need everything that happened before the shower. I need to show a pattern." "There are no cameras inside the showers," Dorian said. "That's why they chose it." "No," Miriam agreed. "But there are cameras everywhere else." She started turning pages faster. "The tier, the chow hall, the corridor outside your cell. Repeated harassment doesn't leave one piece of footage. It leaves a trail. Mattress dragged out of your cell, corridor camera. Commissary stolen, tier camera. Men standing outside your cell after lights out." She stopped and looked up. Something sharpened in her expression. "Mr. Vance, when an institution chooses a blind spot this carefully, it isn't because there is only one camera. It's because someone believes they know exactly what all the others will show." Miriam filed a formal demand for every available recording from C Block connected to the period of harassment. The prison's response came back later. She read it once. Then she went very still. The C Block tier footage for the relevant period was missing. Logged as down for maintenance. Again and again, whenever Harlan's crew was working around Dorian, the lens had somehow gone dark. Then it came back. Someone had turned it off. A camera, disabled on purpose, is not the end of a case. To Miriam Caldwell, it was the beginning of one. Because missing footage is not proof of innocence. But sometimes, it looks a lot like a confession with the words scratched out. She took the maintenance log to a formal hearing and stood in front of a review panel, the warden, and a state corrections official, who had come because the video would not stop spreading. Vernon Keene had wanted the problem quiet. Instead, he now had an attorney with a folder and a country watching the door. Miriam started gently. She laid out the official version in the prison's own words, so everyone in the room could hear how perfectly clean it sounded. Unprovoked. Ambush. Animal. Then she placed the maintenance log on the table. The C-block tier camera, she said, failed repeatedly during the exact period my client says he was being harassed. Then it was suddenly working again right after the shower incident. She looked at Keene. That's either an extraordinarily convenient equipment failure, or someone scheduled the darkness. Keene's jaw tightened. Equipment fails. It does. Miriam agreed pleasantly, which is why your facility installed a pilot program. Secondary cameras. Smaller units. A separate system. A separate drive. Cameras designed to cover the blind spots the older system missed. She let the words settle, including the corridor outside the C-block showers. The room changed. Officer Calvin Mercer, standing against the wall, went still in a way everyone noticed. Mercer knew the old camera schedule by heart. I had not known about the new system. Nobody on the floor had. It was buried in a memo he had never bothered to read. A second eye he had never accounted for, recording quietly while he sat at the far desk with his back turned. Miriam opened her laptop. She did not play the fight. She played what came before it. A grainy corridor feed showed men outside Dorian's cell, his mattress being dragged into the hall. A boot coming down on something small and square. Another clip showed members of Harlan's crew, laughing near the mail slot. Another showed Dorian standing against the cinder block with the phone to his ear while Harlan leaned in and patted his cheek twice. Soft. Then came the corridor outside the shower room. 4 men filed in after Dorian. Harlan entered last. His hand reached back. The bolt slid shut. Miriam paused the footage. My client entered that room alone, she said quietly. 4 men followed him and locked the door from inside. You will notice no one is dragging anyone. You will notice exactly who turned the lock. She closed the laptop. That is not an ambush by one man. That is an ambush of one man. The state official was writing quickly now. Keene had stopped pretending to be calm. But Miriam was not finished, because the panel still had the easy thoughts sitting in the back of their minds. Convicted inmate. Trained fighter. Even if he had been cornered, had he used too much force? Several men had gone to the infirmary. One had a badly injured jaw. Wasn't that proof that Dorian was dangerous? Miriam reached into her folder and pulled out the document she had been saving. You keep calling my client trained, she said. Let me explain exactly how trained he was. She slid a page across the table. Dorian Vance, 18 professional fights, 18 wins, 14 knockouts, state lightweight champion, nationally ranked before his arrest. She let the panel read. This is not a man who learned to brawl in a prison yard. This is a professional athlete whose hands were treated as weapons because of the skill behind them. Keene frowned. You're proving our point. He's dangerous. I'm proving the opposite, Miriam said. Watch. Then she played the fight. First at full speed, then again, frame by frame. The same way people across the country had already studied it. A fighter at his level, she said, knows exactly how much damage a punch can do. That awareness is part of the training. So watch what he does when several men try to hurt him inside a locked room. She pointed to the first attacker. A body shot. Not the head. The body. It drops him. Dorian does not continue. Then the second attacker. Dorian redirects his momentum. One short counter. Nothing more. Then Harlan. Miriam froze the image on the check hook. One punch. Clean. Dorian could have followed him to the floor. He doesn't. He steps back. Then she advanced to the final moments. Dorian was still standing. I was untouched, and he was kneeling beside one of the men who had attacked him, checking his breathing. There it is, Miriam said softly. The most dangerous man in the room is on his knees, making sure the person who came to hurt him is still breathing. She looked at each panel member. A man who truly wanted to hurt them had the skill to do far worse. I had the ability. I had every reason to be afraid. Instead, he used only enough force to survive. Then he stopped. Then he rendered aid. That is not the behavior of an animal. That is disciplined self-defense. The room went silent. The kind of silence Dorian understood well. The kind that falls right before a decision. The corrections official turned toward Mercer. "Officer, were you aware of the pilot cameras?" Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. The pause became its own answer. "Where were you during the disturbance?" the official asked. "At my desk," Mercer said, "doing reports." "With your back to the tier," Miriam added. "We have that on camera too." After that, the official story began falling apart quickly. The injured man's statement collapsed against footage showing Harlan locking the shower door. The witness accounts, all coming from members of Harlan's crew, lost their weight. Then, an inmate who had stayed silent out of fear finally stepped forward. Silas Tate, the older trainer, told the panel about the harassment he had watched and had been unable to stop. Dorian sat through all of it without moving. Isolation had taught him not to hope. But when the state official announced an immediate review of Mercer's conduct and the conditions inside C Block, something in Dorian's chest loosened for the first time in what felt like forever. I thought about his mother, and, for the first time, he allowed himself to believe he might make it home to her. Miriam gathered her folder, leaned toward the glass partition, and said the only thing that mattered. They built their whole case on a camera they thought was off. She almost smiled. They forgot about the one still watching. Once justice finally started moving, it moved quickly. The pilot camera footage went to the State Corrections Board, then to the district attorney, then inevitably to the press gathered outside Ironwood. The official story could not survive contact with the truth. The corridor footage did not lie. The locked shower door did not lie. And a man kneeling to check his attacker's breathing did not lie. Royce Harlan was charged with felony assault for the ambush he had arranged and filmed himself. His own trophy became evidence against him. The wired jaw he had used to gain sympathy turned out to be the least of his problems. I was already serving time for the man he had put into a coma. Now the parole he had been counting on disappeared, and the court added years to the sentence he thought was almost finished. The king of C Block left the hearing in cuffs, while the other inmates watched, in a silence louder than any cheer. Officer Calvin Mercer did not go quietly, but he went. The investigation into the missing tier footage found exactly what Miriam had expected: a pattern of arranged blind spots, ignored complaints, reports written to protect the man who kept the block quiet. Mercer lost his badge and faced charges for falsifying records and willful neglect. That tiny nod he had once given Harlan across the chow hall, the smallest thing imaginable, became one piece of the pattern that ended his career. Warden Vernon Keene resigned before he could be removed. The man who hated attention walked away under the brightest lights of his life, followed by cameras down the same steps he had wanted to keep clear. A state monitor was assigned to Ironwood. The pilot camera program, the one unexpected safeguard that had saved an innocent man, became permanent and expanded through the facility. Then there was the conviction that had sent Dorian to Ironwood in the first place. Miriam Caldwell did not stop with the prison case. She took the robbery conviction apart, the same way she took apart everything else. Slowly, in daylight, the grainy tape, the rushed lineup, the overworked public defender who had barely had time to read the file. Miriam found the gas station's original footage, the full version. She found a clerk who was finally shown a clear image, and the clerk said the words that should have been said from the beginning. "That's not him. That man was heavier, older. That's not the man." The court vacated Dorian Vance's conviction. Wrongful imprisonment. Immediate release. Dorian walked out of Ironwood through the same 3 gates that had swallowed him. Outside, a parking lot was full of people he did not know, people who had followed a few seconds of his life all the way to this moment. They grew quiet as he passed. The way crowds sometimes go quiet around something they understand is bigger than a photograph. Dorian did not raise a fist. He did not make a speech. He simply kept walking toward the one car that mattered. His aunt was driving. The passenger seat was empty and reclined, with a blanket folded across it. "She wanted to come," his aunt said, her voice breaking. "She made us bring her as far as we could. She's at the hospital, Dorian. She's holding on. She's been holding on for this. I made it in time." That was the part that mattered. More than the extra years added to Harlan's sentence. More than the badges. More than the resignations. More than the cameras. Dorian walked into a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic. He knelt beside a bed where a small woman lay. She opened her eyes, and she saw her son. Free. Whole. Home. She lifted one thin hand to his face, to the same cheek that had once been slapped in a prison yard, and she held it there. "I knew," she whispered. "I always knew." Dorian stayed, but the story did not end in that room. It had already grown beyond him. The prison video had become more than a fight. It had become a question people across the country were asking out loud. How many quiet people are sitting in blind spots right now? How many true stories are buried beneath clean reports? Lawmakers cited the case. A reform bill included provisions for mandatory camera coverage and independent review of complaints. In hearings and newspapers, people began calling it the Vance Standard. Dorian never asked for his name to be placed on a law. He had only wanted to keep one promise. He had kept it. How was home? His mother lived long enough to have more good days with him. She was there in a folding chair by the door when Dorian opened his gym. It wasn't much at first. A leased space in a rough part of town. A concrete floor. A boxing ring Dorian built himself from second-hand rope and donated canvas. He hung one simple sign above the door. No champion's name. No logo. Just 2 words. Second corner. Because everyone, Dorian said, deserves someone in their corner when life gives them another chance. The kids came first. The ones the neighborhood had already given up on. The ones teachers called trouble. The ones police already recognized by sight. Dorian did not ask about their records. He asked about their footwork. He taught them the lesson he had learned the hard way, in a place full of blind spots. Real strength is not just the power you can use. Sometimes it's the power you choose not to use. Anybody can throw a punch, he told them. It takes a fighter to know when not to. Silas Tate eventually joined the morning sessions. When the old trainer earned his release, one of the first calls he made was to Dorian's gym. Soon he was back in a corner with his half glasses and his training book, calling out to teenagers about keeping their hands up. And, for the first time in decades, he looked like a man exactly where he belonged. Then came the others. Men fresh out of prison, blinking in the daylight, carrying records, reputations, and nowhere to go. Dorian gave them mops. I gave them gloves. I gave them a reason to show up. Some of them had lived in places like Ironwood. A few had once been men like Harlan and were trying hard not to be that person anymore. Dorian did not turn them away. I had learned that the line between the person on the floor and the person standing over him can be thinner than anyone wants to believe, and that mercy, when given sincerely, sometimes finds its way back around. Miriam Caldwell visited from time to time between cases. The Vance Standard eventually became law in more than one state. Miriam still carried a folder, as always, filled with other quiet people in other blind spots who needed someone willing to look more carefully at what everyone else had already decided. She never ran out of folders. But she said Dorian's gym was the only courtroom she had ever seen where everybody had a chance to win. Dorian still trained early, alone before the kids arrived. He wrapped his hands the old way, slowly, knuckle by knuckle. He worked the heavy bag in the gray morning light and remembered a prison yard. A slap. A promise. I had walked into Ironwood as a champion nobody there knew. I walked out as a man the whole country had learned to recognize. And somewhere inside that concrete box, he had decided that if his name was ever going to mean anything, it would mean this. A second corner for anyone the world had counted out. That's the story. But before you go, let me ask you the same kind of question this story asked from the beginning. Have you ever been underestimated? Written off, talked down to, judged by a uniform, a face, or one difficult chapter by people who never took the time to learn the rest of your story. If you have, then you understand something Dorian came to understand deeply. Being underestimated can hurt. Being treated unfairly can make anger feel like the easiest answer. But strength is not only about what we are capable of doing. It is also about the choices we make when we have every reason to lose control. Dorian's story reminds us that restraint can be strength, kindness can survive humiliation, and defending yourself does not require becoming cruel. It also reminds us that actions have consequences. Harlan chose intimidation. Mercer chose to look away. Others chose silence because they were afraid. Miriam chose to pay attention. Silas chose to speak when speaking finally had a chance to matter. And Dorian, after everything that had been done to him, chose not to build his future around revenge. He built a gym. He gave people another chance. He made room for kids who had been labeled too quickly, and for adults who were trying to become better than the worst thing they had ever done. That may be one of the most important lessons here. We do not always control how other people see us. We do not always get to choose the unfair moment that lands in our path. But we can choose what kind of person we become afterward. We can choose responsibility over bitterness, mercy over humiliation, courage over fear. And when someone has truly changed, we can choose to leave a door open instead of deciding that one bad chapter must become the whole book. Forgiveness does not mean pretending harm never happened. Responsibility does not mean giving up compassion. Sometimes the strongest response is to tell the truth. Accept the consequences that belong to us, refuse the ones that do not, and still leave enough kindness in ourselves to help somebody else stand up. So tell me in the comments, when has someone underestimated you, and what did you do with that moment? If this story moved you, share it with someone who may need to hear it. Someone who is quietly holding a line nobody else can see. And if you want more stories about people who are underestimated, overlooked, and stronger than they first appear, subscribe and stay with us. Your corner is right here. I make these stories because good people are sometimes treated like they don't matter, and too often the world looks away. Dorian isn't real, but the feeling behind his story is. So this is for everyone who stayed quiet without giving up. Everyone who stayed kind without becoming weak. Everyone who carried responsibility, made better choices, offered forgiveness where it was possible, and kept moving forward with dignity. Being strong does not always mean hitting back. Sometimes it means knowing exactly what you could do and choosing the person you still want to be when the moment is over. I see you. I really do.